And I work with a wide variety of organizations and companies, colleges and high schools, to the US military, to the government, to neighborhood watch groups, healthcare workers, realtors, sales teams, companies, nonprofits. I mean, anyone who has anyone in their organization who's worried about their safety or dealing with the people in their organization or people on the street and want to feel more confident in verbal and physical strategies, I help them to be able to do that.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. Or if this is your first time joining in, thank you for being with us. This podcast is a safe space for victims and survivors of rape and sexual assault to share their stories and connect with others who've been through similar experiences. I believe that sharing our stories is the first step to healing, and my hope is that the SAS podcast will help victims and survivors feel less alone and more empowered. I'm your host, Dave Markel, coming to you from the Pod Vlog studio in St. George, Utah, and I'm here each week to provide a platform for victims and survivors to tell their story and for experts and professionals to offer insights and information to help us all on our healing path and to provide an education on being trauma-informed in order to help bring justice to victims and survivors of rape or sexual assault. If you are a victim, survivor, or know someone who is, or if you investigate or prosecute rape or sexual assault cases, or if you provide treatment, counseling, or interact with victims or survivors of rape or sexual assault in any capacity, I urge you to listen to this podcast. Remember, you are not alone, and we are all here to support you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me for episode 39 of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. And happy Independence Day from me to you on this sunny, hot 4th of July in St. George, Utah. This week's episode is nothing short of incredible. I have the honor and privilege of introducing you to Nicole Snell. Nicole is the owner and CEO of Girls Fight Back and the founder of Outdoor Defense. Nicole teaches practical, empowering, and functional verbal and physical self-defense skills that truly work. Nicole travels the world speaking and training to women and all genders, as she puts it in her website, to help manage your personal safety, recognize manipulative behavior, increase your awareness, set boundaries, develop healthy relationships, embark on solo adventure, travel with confidence, and open up your world. I know Nicole through a mutual friend and former work colleague, Eric Barreras, and I'm thankful that he introduced me to Nicole. I'm also proud and honored to have Nicole as a guest on this show. She's a powerful soul, and we covered lots of ground in this episode. I'm excited to bring it to you. So let's just get to it, and I'll catch you on the other side. Here's Nicole. Nicole Snell, welcome to Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. Thank you so much for being with me.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
This is an honor. I know you're a busy woman and you have a lot going on. So for you to take the time to be with me here on the podcast is really an honor and a privilege. I think what I'll do, Nicole, is have you tell a little bit about yourself and what you do and how it is that we even came into contact with each other.
Yeah, I would love to. My name is Nicole Snell, and I'm the CEO and owner of Girls Fight Back and the founder of Outdoor Defense. I'm also a lead instructor for both Impact Personal Safety and Impact Global. And I'm an international speaker and trainer, violence prevention educator, and self-defense expert. And I specialize in teaching people how to manage their safety so that they can open up their world and live limitlessly. My company, Girls Fight Back, actually started in 2001, and it was founded in honor of a woman named Shannon McNamara. And she was a college student, a member of a sorority, an athlete, and she was taken from this world in an awful, tragic act of violence. And her friend, Erin Weed, started the company Girls Fight Back to honor Shannon's memory and her fierce warrior spirit, because Shannon fought very hard. And there was enough evidence collected that was able to prosecute her murderer. And so Erin started the company because she wanted to give women their peace back. And this happened in a college community And so the college students were very fearful and very anxious about safety and what they could do. And Aaron wanted to give them practical skills so that they could walk through the world with less fear. I got involved with the company in 2014 as a speaker. And then I bought the company in 2020 because the owner at the time had decided to sell. And I believe so much in our mission and what we do and the lives that we help and the people that we empower, not just women and girls, but I teach people of all gender identities and giving them these skills to live a life that is not governed by fear and is instead a life that they feel like they can handle situations that they encounter, from uncomfortable conversations to manipulative behavior that they're recognizing to potentially dangerous situations, from a place of power that can change how someone walks through the world and give them access to doing anything in the world that they want to do: activities, hobbies, jobs, relationships, etc. I was very passionate about it and decided that, okay, I think I'll be the best person to lead this company forward. And she agreed and sold me the company. And then COVID hit, obviously 2020.
Yeah.
And I had to decide how I was going to bring all of my interactive programming that had up until this point always been live in person, and how to bring it to the virtual space. And I was able to do that and continue to offer virtual trainings. And now things are pretty much back in person, but I still offer virtual trainings. And I work with a wide variety of organizations and companies, colleges and high schools, to the US military, to the government, to neighborhood watch groups, healthcare workers, realtors, sales teams, companies, nonprofits. I mean, anyone who has anyone in their organizations worried about their safety or dealing with the people in their organization or people on the street and want to feel more confident in verbal and physical strategies, I help them to be able to do that.
And that's amazing. Traditionally, this podcast has been geared towards survivors and victims. And the reason I wanted you on, and a different aspect that I'd like to approach for this episode, is that whole concept of prevention and fighting back. And so I'm interested in making people aware of you and your organization and what it is that you offer. Thank you for what you do.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Let's talk a little bit about Eric Barreras and how you got to meet him and how it is that you and I kind of got connected, because my audience doesn't know Eric, and I'll let you introduce the audience to Eric, and then I'll talk a little bit about how I know him and why it is that we connected.
Yeah, so Eric Barreras is a friend and a colleague of mine. He is a passionate advocate for survivors of sexual assault and gender-based violence. He is just a force in this work and in this industry. I met Eric. I was working with a company that was contracted with the US Navy and doing sexual assault prevention and response training at military installations around the world. And I actually met him at an installation in Northern California. He was in charge of bringing the group in, and, we did the training. We stayed connected on LinkedIn. And a couple of years later, he reached out and said that he had a group of collaborative teammates, speakers, survivors, advocates, professionals from all different disciplines, from domestic violence survivors, sexual assault survivors, military sexual assault survivors, male survivors, human trafficking survivors, stalking survivors. And he had accumulated this group of people who were all passionate but had different focuses into a collaborative teammate that he called Difference Makers 10 Strong.
Yeah.
And this was an opportunity for us to collaborate with each other, learn from each other, and to be able to provide comprehensive training to communities and installations as well. Maybe they're looking for someone who could do, stalking and human trafficking. Well, great. We have a connection to two people who do that. And so it became an opportunity for us to serve more communities because we had a connection between all of us. So he asked me to be involved, and the timing was perfect because he asked me to be part of this right when I bought Girls Fight Back.
Great.
And I said, well, this is actually perfect timing. And so now here I am. And so Eric is the one who referred me to you.
Yeah. And I love that you mentioned the Sex Assault Prevention and Response Program. The SAPR program is the way it's referred to in the military. And Eric was a colleague of mine back when I worked for the Army, starting, I think, back in 2009. Eric was a Criminal Investigative Division, CID agent, investigating sex assault and rape cases, and came through a course that we put on. And that's how I met Eric. He and I did some collaboration a little bit on some training materials and providing materials for him and his curriculum of what he was eventually going to turn into Difference Makers. So you're right. Eric is a great guy. And I'm so honored that he connected you with me and that we have this opportunity. Nicole, tell me a little bit more about Girls Fight Back. Let's delve into the specifics of what it is that Girls Fight Back is all about, so that my listeners have an opportunity to know what resources are available to them through you.
Yeah, absolutely. So Girls Fight Back is a company that does a variety of training. I have a full training catalog to address the needs of college students, to companies, to outdoor adventurers. And the whole goal of what I teach is to give people simple, practical, evidence-based, research supported skills that have been shown to not only prevent violence, but also to help survivors heal, reduce the symptoms of PTSD, and to help people get out into their life and do the things that they enjoy the most. And so my programs are 75 to 90 minutes plus Q&A. They are presented as either keynotes, seminars, or workshops. I work with any size group. I have programs that include physical skills because it's important that we know how we can use our body to protect ourselves if that's the choice that we make in the moment. But so much of what I teach is not physical. And that's, I think, one of the most important things about the work that I do is that what I teach is known as empowerment-based self-defense. And this has been around for over 40 years. If you are a research nerd like I am, I can give you lists of research and papers and journal articles that have done studies on this across the years to show its effectiveness. Studies that have been done with female veterans that were survivors of military sexual assault. Their PTSD symptoms were reduced by taking a type of empowerment-based self-defense class. So empowerment-based self-defense means that we acknowledge that the only person responsible for the crime is the criminal. That is the only person that is responsible. And starting from that framework, we teach people practical skills. Physical is a part of it, but most of it is non-physical. We're teaching people how to use their voice, how to understand that their own power, how to recognize manipulative behavior, to trust their intuition, to fine tune their situational awareness, to learn how to de-escalate situations, to learn how to be a bystander for other people. And it's all of these skills that we are basically using every day. Being able to use those skills to manage the relationships that we have in our life, the dynamic situations that we face, can give us a choice in how to respond to a situation in a way that works for us. It's all about options and choices. It's not about telling people you have to do this, you have to do it this way. And it's most certainly not about giving people a list of do's and don'ts of you have to do this or you can't do this. And, you know, those aren't very empowering. I am I'm a woman who has been solo traveling most of my life, pretty much all of my adult life. I love to hike solo and camp solo. And I'm doing all of these activities that people say, oh, it's not safe and it's not safe for women and you're just looking for trouble. And, you know, I want to make sure that, especially when I'm doing these trainings, I want to make sure people understand that, yes, stranger attacks do happen, but women are most likely assaulted by someone they know. Yeah. And so a lot of these do's and don'ts that are out there don't actually address that. They don't address the gender-based violence and domestic violence, and those dynamics don't really help keep us safe, right? It's just restrictions on our life. So my goal is to break through all those restrictions, throw them all in the trash, and instead give people realistic skills that they can use that is not a burden for them to have to remember a list of things, allows them to use these skills in a lot of situations with their family, with their partner, with their kids, with their colleagues, with people they run into on the street, with any type of situation, you can apply these skills. And when you know that you have options for how to manage situations, then you can have that sense of empowerment and know that, okay, I have options for how to reply. I can use my verbal skills. I can use this. I can try to do what I can to get to safety. And if not, okay, now I can use my physical skills. Because another aspect of what Girls Fight Back does is it's trying to break down the gender stereotypes across the board. You know, the idea that women are incapable of protecting themselves, and then the idea that men just automatically know how to protect themselves. Instead, it's just giving people real strategies that they can use, helping people to deal with discomfort or unsure of how to handle a situation, instead giving them this toolbox basically of skills. And that's what I do to help people be able to make choices that work for them from a place of power.
And I love that. It made me remember that one of the people that is an endorser of yours is, trying to remember his name.
Gavin DeBecker.
DeBecker. And he talks a lot about fear, right? His book.
The Gift of Fear.
The Gift of Fear. Thank you. And he endorses what you're doing because of some of the things that you just said. When you're in a dangerous situation, your training gives the ability to have some resources at their immediate disposal.
Yes.
And not always, like you said, physical. Can you talk a little bit more about those non-physical responses that are reactions to some fear that may be coming up in somebody's body and mind in a given situation?
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up Gavin DeBecker and his book, The Gift of Fear. I highly recommend, if anyone who's listening, if you have not read that book, please go get it and read that book. I use that book. I reference that book in every presentation that I do. And I feel like it's recommended reading for anyone in the violence prevention field. I feel like he talks at length about intuition and fear, and how the whole book title, The Gift of Fear, is that fear is what lets us know that there's a problem. It's our body's way of telling us there's something to deal with. It shouldn't be something that we don't want to ever feel fear, but to understand that fear, that sense of something not being right, is a gift, because it's letting us know there's a problem. And then that acknowledgement that there's a problem then gives us the space to figure out what we can do next. So he talks about intuition and fear a lot. He has something called the tools of manipulation that I reference in my programs as well, that helps people identify when somebody is being manipulative to them. These are all non-physical things. We want to try to make sure that the encounters we have do not devolve into a physical interaction. That's the goal, right? Nobody wants to have a fight. The best fight is the one you never have to fight. If I am getting into an argument or someone's harassing me, and I can use the skills that I teach about verbal boundaries, space and distance, ways to deal with that situation to where I can walk away to safety or the person walks away, that's a win. And that has actually happened to me. I can share that story with you later if you'd like, but I use my non-physical self-defense skills pretty much daily, flying on a plane and interacting with people. And that's empowering when we can open up that definition of self-defense to include all of the self-protective behaviors that people are likely already doing, but they don't consider it to be self-defense. And so when we can broaden that definition and understand that it encompasses everything that we do, our mental process as we're evaluating a situation and making choices to try to limit our risk in a particular situation. And when we can acknowledge that and then allow ourselves to learn more skills to be able to do that even more effectively, or to have even more choices and options available, then we can really start to empower people with skills that the research has shown can prevent violence and can help survivors who've maybe already experienced violence and have fear or anxiety about interacting with people or going into social situations, or, not sure how to respond when someone is being disrespectful or harassing or predatory, and giving them skills so that they can acknowledge it, recognize it, address it from a place of power versus feeling like they don't have a choice in what they can do.
Yeah. Wow. Amazing stuff. And you mentioned earlier that having this training actually can reduce the impacts of PTSD. Can you address some of that and how the psychology works in terms of the things that you just said, being aware of that gift of fear and the techniques that you teach? How does it actually reduce the PTSD effects?
Yeah, so there's a study, I think it was called Taking Charge, and it was done with a group of female veterans who had all experienced military sexual abuse. They had documented symptoms of PTSD and anxiety and all of the symptoms that, hypervigilance, all of these things that had affected them because of what they experienced. In this study, they went through, I forget how many weeks. It was like a course of a few weeks of an empowerment-based self-defense program. And then they went back and did the follow-ups with the women 3 months, 6 months, a year later. The documented effects from that training was that the women experienced less anxiety. They felt more comfortable speaking up and using their voice. They felt like they could enter into social interactions and be able to interact with people, because if someone was making them feel uncomfortable, they felt like they would have more options and feel more confident being able to address it. The idea of more self-efficacy. I'm a survivor myself, and I know that self-blame, that self-doubt that often plagues us as we replay something that happened and wonder like, oh, what should I have done, or what could I have done? And what I teach isn't about going back to that moment and telling someone what they did or didn't do was right or wrong, because whatever somebody did to survive is the right thing to do. Yeah. That's it, hands down. No arguments. There's nothing else to say. Whatever you do, whatever you did to survive is the right thing. And what I teach is about giving you tools and options for the future. When they learned these skills, and I can speak from my own experience, when I learned these skills, then I felt better equipped to address something. So if something ever happened again, if I ever recognized these red flags again, if I was ever in a situation where I felt uncomfortable again, instead of feeling powerless, I would feel powerful. And that is the process by which a lot of people who have taken this training, they've increased their self-confidence. They've found words that they can say to address things, which gives them that self-efficacy, that feeling of autonomy about being able to be in control of the things that we can control. Because a lot of things in our life are out of our control. Of course, I wish we lived in a world where violence didn't exist. I wish there were no predators and there were no criminals. And I know there are many people working in many different multidisciplinary task force, for lack of a better word, that are addressing that and trying to make that the reality. You know, we're addressing all of those root factors that lead to gender-based violence. They're addressing, you know, the perpetrators and the predators from that angle. But until there are zero perpetrators, predators, criminals, then it's important that we have the options and the knowledge and the education and the skills to be able to address a situation that we may encounter and to know what we can do if we're faced with something, that we can do that from a place of power instead of fear.
Yeah. And I think that fits with a lot of what I know in terms of the neuroscience of trauma, in that if you do have tactics and resources available emotionally, psychologically, and physically to deal with that oncoming threat, yes, in retrospect, afterwards, people do feel so much more confident that they did what they were trained to do. And again, it really boils down to what you said earlier, that if you survived the situation, you did what was right. But if you've got an extra set of tools and abilities and knowledge to apply, that actually calms the brain and gives it a place to go in terms of helping that survival mechanism effectively operate. And so I'm really impressed with the approach that you are taking with Girls Fight Back. The training itself, can they be multiple sessions of training? And is that part of your programming so that this kind of embeds into the neural paths of your brain?
Yes, I can do that. I can come out a certain number of times in a week or in a month to do this training. There are some organizations that bring me back every 6 months or every year to like retrain their teams. As I travel around the world doing this work, whenever I'm in a location, I try to connect them with local resources, you know, maybe a full contact self-defense course that is offered in their area so that when I leave, they still have access and they can learn more. And that's something that Impact Personal Safety does. So that's another company, a separate company that is a partner company to Girls Fight Back, but they're their own separate entity. And I'm a lead instructor for them. And what Impact Personal Safety does is they use adrenaline-based training to do what's known as stress inoculation training. So they're training students in fully adrenalized fights. Because when your brain is adrenalized and you're doing something that's scenario based, your body and your brain can't tell the difference between something that's real and something that's simulated. Right. And so we're putting them in these realistic simulations to get their adrenaline going, for lack of a less scientific way of putting it, but to get their adrenaline going so that they can feel what that's like, learn how to manage it and learn how to use their physical skills through that. Mm-hmm. And then that becomes procedural memory, because at that point, we're not training their brain, we're training their body how to respond. Impact uses gross muscle movements and gross motor skill movements. It's not about memorizing anything complicated. An intro is 3 hours and then the full course is 16 hours, 4 days, 4 hours a day. That is enough to get those skills that are being taught to be a part of their body, like the physical part. There's also the verbal practice. So Impact will do verbal skills practice with a lead instructor that's coaching and then a padded instructor who is acting as the assailant. They will put them through realistic verbal skills, what an assailant or attacker would actually say. And a lot of what they say is what students have told them that they've experienced in the world before. Right. Having the students learn how to talk to somebody and use these verbal strategies to try to get that person to walk away while they're adrenalized. And a lot of students say, like, that's the hardest part of the class. And that is the thing that they're using the most often, because they used to feel fear so much that they would freeze, which we know is a very normal response to danger. Mm-hmm. It's not the reason that anybody should be blamed for something that happened. Freezing is a normal thing that happens. And what my training is meant to do is to help reduce that freeze response. The way I explain it is, if you go to your brain, imagine your brain's like a filing cabinet, and you go to your brain and you go to the file folder for self-defense, and there's nothing in that folder. And you need something from that folder down the line. You're going to go to that folder on your brain. There's nothing in there. So you get the little spinning wheel like you get on your computer, right? So you might freeze for a little bit longer because now in that moment, you're trying to figure out what to do. But imagine if there's already information in there, then that spinning wheel might not last as long because you have options already at your fingertips to be able to respond and react to that situation. And so that's what the training is meant to do. So where Impact has chapters around the US. So whenever I travel, I try to connect people with the nearest chapter or other companies that I've also vetted that are also empowerment based and focus on giving people skills that are practical and simple with the framework of we're giving you a choice in how to respond and no one's ever at fault for what happens to them.
Yeah. You mentioned then that this is multi-gender also. Your training applies to men as well. I'm taking it because
Yes.
men are sexually
yes.
assaulted. Men are attacked all the time also. Can you give some of the impacts that you've gotten from men who've had this course?
Over the course of the times that I've been doing these, I've had men, when I've talked about the verbal strategies, raise their hand in the audience and say, wait a second, you mean I can use this too? I say, yes. Yes, absolutely. And then they will share a story of an encounter they had that they felt uncomfortable, but they didn't know that they could say anything or they didn't know what to say. And they just endured it because they didn't know what other options they had. Mm-hmm. And now they do have options. You know, I've had men come up to me after presentations and say, I'm so glad that you said X, Y, and Z. They'll share a story about what happened and, you know, I'll validate that whatever they did was the right thing. And they're like, I know now I can use this in the future if this happens. Everyone should have this training or this should be in every school. I hear all the time. And I agree. I would love this to be as widespread as possible. To as many communities as possible. And then I just did a training where someone did an anonymous testimonial. They self-identified as a male. And he said, you know what, this is so valuable even for a male like me. And it helps me understand what my female coworkers experience and allows me to have more empathy for them. And it allows me to know that in situations that I felt uncomfortable, that I didn't know I could say anything, now I know I can say something. Like I said, it's helping to break down gender stereotypes across the board to create that empathy and to give people realistic skills that they can then apply to not only help themselves, but maybe also be more comfortable now speaking up for others.
Nicole, that is so impressive and so important. And I'm very thrilled that you're speaking to my audience because so many of them are facing recovery and healing and thriving after an assault, whether it was sexual or robbery or domestic violence, interpersonal violence type assault, with the fear of now what do I do? And how do I progress? And how do I handle this next time? Because really the neuroscience of trauma says that you repeat whatever it was that you did before that saved you, that aspect of getting through it. But if you've got tools that get you through it in a better way, in a safer way, that don't make you freeze as long, I love that analogy that you gave, then everybody is in a much better position to avoid violence. And so it's critically important for my audience to hear. Hopefully they'll reach out to you and get more education on what it is that you're doing. And you mentioned that this person that came up to you that identified as a male that said, you know, he had an experience. And you mentioned that you too had a personal experience where you utilized this and you offered to share it. Do you mind talking a little bit about that experience?
I don't mind. I would be happy to share. I have more than one story, obviously. I experienced sexual abuse as a child and complex trauma throughout my childhood that I don't speak publicly about because for me, my survivor story is my power is in being able to keep certain things private. So I'll share what I just shared with you, but I don't go into details. And maybe one day I'll feel more comfortable sharing. And I understand the power in being able to share the story and have other people be able to relate to help others. Where I'm at in my healing journey is to share only what I'm comfortable with sharing. Yeah. So the story that I'm going to share with you, I'm completely comfortable sharing, just to let you know that there's more layers to me that have led me to where I am today and why I feel like this training is just so valuable. I wish I would have had this as a kid, as a teen, before college. But I can't go back and change that. But what I can do is I can give people the tools now. I can make sure that other people have the tools so that hopefully they don't experience what I experienced. Yeah. Or if they did, they can know that they can reach out to resources and that there are people there to help them because I didn't know that. Mm-hmm. So yeah, good. What happened to me was the one that I'm going to share is in 2021. I was in Europe with a friend. We were celebrating the holiday. It was Christmas Eve when this happened. And my friend and I were in Madrid. And we decided to go to this restaurant that our hotel recommended. We walked there. It wasn't far. It was half a mile away. We got the earliest reservation, which is 8, because in Spain, they just eat dinner much later than we do here in the US. Great dinner, wonderful time. We had walked down there without purses or anything, because what did we need for dinner? You know, your phone and your wallet, right? And it was cold, so we had big jackets and our phone in our pocket, and that was it. And when we decided to leave, it was around 10. And we thought, instead of walking back, we're going to take a ride share because that just seems like the safe thing to do. We called the ride share. We waited until it was a few minutes away. And then we left the restaurant. And the moment I left the restaurant, my intuition peaked. And I remember, looking around and making eye contact with people and just having my senses on high alert. And I didn't see anything or notice anything that was off, but I just felt that feeling. And I turned to my friend and I said, we need to get out of here. And she says, I know, we're getting ready to go into our rideshare. Like we're going to be out of here in a few minutes. We waited until the last minute to walk down. So we didn't have to be waiting on the street for very long.
Right.
And there's still people walking around. There's lights on. The restaurant was still open, so it's still a bustling area. We walked down the way because we had to walk a little bit down a pedestrian space to get to where the road was, where we could pick up the car. Again, we're less than 3 minutes out there. We see the headlights. The car comes and stops in front of us. We check the license plate to match it. It's our car. And I opened the back door to let my friend get in the car first. And before I could get into the car, I noticed movement to my right side. And when I turned my head and looked, there was a man running straight at me with his hands and fists. I will never forget his face. For as long as I live, I will always remember his face. In that split second, I knew a few things. I knew that I wasn't going to be able to get in the car and close the door and lock it before he got to me because he was coming too fast and he was already too close by the time I noticed him. 2 is I knew, where am I going to run? I don't know where I am. I don't know where to run to. And 3rd, if I run away, the car door's open. If I run, then my friend is right there. And, I don't know if she'll know what's going on to be able to close the door behind me.
Right.
And so I did what I train other people to do. And what I've been trained to do for all these years is I just turned and faced him with my hands up in front of my face, palms facing out. I call it the power stance. Because I thought, okay, if he's going to attack me, I'm going to face him and we're going to have a fight where I'm going to see what's coming versus him trying to attack me from behind.
Yeah.
And so I did. I just turned and faced him and I said, what's going on? I don't remember consciously making that decision to say that. It's just what fell out of my mouth in that moment. I just said, hey, what's going on? And I thought, okay, this is going to be the day I'm going to use my physical skills for the first time. All right, here we go. But he stopped. The moment I turned to face him, he stopped. It was like someone pumped the brakes on him and he just skidded to a stop. And he was still a little too close. He's about 3 to 4 feet away, which was still too close, but there was nowhere for me to go back to because the car was right behind me. The door still open. So technically, yeah, safety is 2 feet away, but I couldn't safely get there.
Yeah. And
so I just kept my hands up. And then my friend calls out to me from the car, hey, Nicole, why aren't you getting in? Because she couldn't see. My body was blocking the view. She had no idea what was going on. And I had to call over my shoulder and say, okay, there's a problem. And then she looked and she goes, what do we do? I said, we just wait. And I just kept my hands up and he tried to walk around me, to get to my side. And I just turned and faced him and his face, he just was so angry looking. His his body positioning was very aggressive. And I just kept my hands up and I again said, hey, what's going on? It felt like it was going on for minutes, but I know it was probably just seconds. You know how the neurobiology of the brain works in those types of situations.
Right.
And then he didn't rush towards me. He didn't try to close the distance and attack me in that sense. But what he did is he leaned back and he kicked me, he was trying to kick me in the face. And so he kicked me. My hands were up and they were still up. So all he did was he kicked my hand. But if my hand hadn't have been there, he would have kicked me in the side of the jaw easily. And it was a hard kick. It made a sound like my hand was lobster red from where he had kicked my hand. And I thought, okay, the fight has just started. But before I could do anything else, I blocked the kick and I was like, okay, what's next? Am I going to have to, rush in and start to fight? 2 men ran in from the side. As soon as this guy made contact with me, the Uber driver got out and they all converged on him and started yelling at him. And the guys grabbed him. And then he starts really being frantic with his movements and started yelling. And he had not said a word to this point. He had not said a word, answered my question, made any sound, nothing. At that moment, I saw my opening. I ran around the back of the car and I got in on the other side. My friend closed her door. I closed my door. We locked the doors. And she asked, oh my gosh, your face, Nicole, are you okay? But she heard the sound and she saw where he kicked, but she didn't realize that it was only my hand. And I said, no, I'm okay. I'm fine. It was just my hand. I'm safe. I'm not hurt. It's okay. And then the driver came back a few seconds later and then we drove to safety. The driver did ask me, he said, what did you do? And I said, what do you mean? What did I do? What did you do? Why did he attack? I don't know why he attacked me. I didn't do anything. My friend and I talked about it. We went back to the hotel, like everything was fine. I thought about going to the police, but really I wasn't hurt. He wasn't hurt. I don't know if he would still be there if I talked to them. I don't know how the justice system works in Spain. We were only going to be there for a couple more days. I didn't do anything official beyond just getting back to the hotel. What that experience refreshed for me in a very traumatic way was how important this training is.
Yeah.
Like how thankful I am that I had the skills to be able to do something in this situation. And the something that I chose to do, even though I only had a split second to decide, got me to safety. And I didn't have to actually physically fight. I didn't have to get hurt. I didn't have to hurt somebody else. And I was able to do something from a place of power. And yeah, bystanders came in, which was great, and I don't want to talk about or, try to visualize, well, what would have happened if they, this is what happened. If the bystanders hadn't been there, I would have made other decisions and done what I needed to do. Right. But in this instance, this is how it came about. And I got to safety. And I want as many people who want this training, I want them to have this. I want them to be able to have options for when we experience situations in our life that are scary or threatening or uncomfortable or violent, because we live in a world where violence exists. And unfortunately, that's just the truth. It may come from people we don't expect. It may come in situations we don't expect, where it's Christmas Eve and you're vacationing with a friend. All of the don'ts in the world wouldn't have saved us. That saved me in that situation, right? Like the whole, well, don't go by yourself. Well, I wasn't by myself. Don't carry a lot of money. I wasn't carrying a lot of money. Don't carry a purse or anything flat. It wasn't doing any of that. Don't walk home at night by yourself. Yeah, no, we called a ride share. Like we did all the things that quote unquote are supposed to guarantee your safety. There's no guarantee of safety. Even my training is not a guarantee of safety. But what it is an option that is more empowering than us trying to restrict our lives and make our world small, hoping that will keep us safe, because that may not always keep us safe.
Yeah. Wow. Powerful story. Powerful on multiple levels. I think one of the things that it immediately made me question was, now that that's happened, have you ever gone back to analyze step by step what it is that you did that stopped him? I mean, it didn't totally stop him, but it changed his trajectory. Just the fact that you say you put your hands up, doing that is part of your training, that physical aspect. Once you realize, hey, this could go to a fight. And the way you tell the story, I kind of get the implication that he didn't know what to do with that initially. It bought you some time, and it put you in a situation where you could tell your friend, hey, something's wrong here. It changed a lot of things. What other analytical aspects of your training have you applied to that story that have said, this works, this works, this works?
Yeah. So the turning and facing is definitely something that I know is effective and was effective in that situation. And there's research behind that as well. A lot of the literature talks about forceful resistance being effective, and forceful resistance doesn't just have to be physical, but it can be your voice, your body language. There's also research on body language and how that in itself can be a deterrent, because assailants are often looking for people that they consider to be vulnerable or accessible or distracted or lacking in credibility. And they may manipulate a situation to try to make one of those things or all of those things more likely. If you show confidence, I mean, I was scared until the situation started. And then I don't remember feeling anything, but just dealing with the situation. Right. In the split second before then, I had that moment of, this isn't really happening. He's running to somebody behind the car on the other side, that denial. Mm-hmm. And then I thought, okay, well, if he really is running to me and it looks like he is, what can I do in this moment that can potentially stop this situation, or at least put me in a better position to protect myself if this person does mean me harm? And if he is running to someone on the other side, what harm does it do for me to turn and face him with my hands up?
Right.
Like he might look at me and say, oh, look at that weird tourist. Okay, I don't care. Yeah. So there's nothing for me to lose from doing that. So I know that turning and facing was not something he was expecting. He was probably expecting a more fearful reaction. His goal was to take me by surprise and to likely attack me from behind. My next moment was turn my back to get into the car, which would have left me completely open. I didn't do any of those things. And that just broke his pattern of thinking.
Right.
Where now he had to stop. And I don't think he knew what to do. I don't know what his frame of mind was. I talked about this with some of my colleagues, and they're like, you'll never know. Unless you can meet him someday and ask him, you'll never know the motivations. All you can go from is from what happened. But what happened is I turned and faced him with confidence, and I used my voice in a calm way. I think I just intuitively knew that he was so angry that if I would have been like, hey, back off, that might not have been the verbal strategy that would have gotten me the response that I wanted, which was for him to walk away. Right. And I just felt like I intuitively knew that, which is why I was like, hey, what's going on? And he stopped and yeah, he tried to kick me, but I feel like it was a kick out of frustration. Like, I am not getting what I wanted. This is not going the way I planned. I'm just frustrated and I'm going to just flail. Cause that was what it felt like just like a flailing kick. So I think everything that I have learned and trained in what I teach people are the elements that help to keep me safe in that moment.
So powerful. At what age do you recommend people start getting this training?
I think talking about boundaries and safety and feeling empowered to make decisions about your body as far as like, oh, I don't like it when I'm touched here, or I don't want to hug this family member, or I don't want to kiss this person. I feel like those conversations can start as early as the child understands those concepts, right? And it can be done in an age appropriate way. I know I've taught students as young as 5, 6, and 7. And again, in an age appropriate way. Like, we're not talking about these very complex concepts. We keep it done from like a kid's perspective. Kids are more likely to be assaulted by someone they know. Was it 91% of children are assaulted by someone known to them and their family? It's someone that grooms, that, uses these tools of manipulation to get closer to the child over the course of time, sometimes before the abuse starts, or it starts, very innocuously. I mean, same with domestic violence. Domestic violence doesn't often start with the physical. It starts with, the gaslighting and the financial abuse and isolating and breaking down their mental state and their self-confidence. Teaching kids like, hey, if someone's making you feel uncomfortable, you tell a trusted adult. Like, it can just be as simple as that, and giving them that outlet. And something that we teach when I'm teaching the kids classes with Impact is you tell until you feel better. You tell this person. If that person doesn't help you, you tell somebody else, and you keep telling until you feel better. And we teach them how to interact with strangers, because we don't want to say all strangers are bad, because not all strangers are bad. Most strangers don't mean you any harm. And the child may be in a situation where they have to ask a stranger for help. Maybe they're lost at an amusement park or something. And so we teach them safe ways for interacting with people they don't know, as well as how to interact with people that they do know. And we teach them about using their voice, and we teach them about, ways they can use their body if they have to physically defend themselves. Talking about boundaries, but again, in an age appropriate way. We teach them about intuition in an age appropriate way. I think as young as like maybe 7 or 8 even, to start with these concepts, and then just keep building on them as they mature and they reach puberty, and then they reach different stages of their life where they need additional tools to deal with the new situations they face that their age and their new environment brings, is so valuable, I think, to start as young as we can in a way in which the material will be understood.
Right. Nicole, I am looking at the clock and kind of going, oh my gosh, this time went by so fast, and I have so many more questions. My first question, though, I'm going to go ahead and ask, is there a possibility you and I could do this again on another episode and go in depth a little bit further? Because part of what I want to talk about is what we inferred a little bit ago, and that is the after effects of reduced PTSD. So that situation in Madrid that you had, I'm sure in retrospect, you look back on that and are saying things to yourself that are more empowering. And yes, this worked. And yes, I am so impressed with how I responded. And yes, it's a traumatic experience, but it probably doesn't have the same impact trauma-wise as it would have had you not done anything and had this gone a completely different way. And yeah, I can see how empowering this must be, even to you in this situation that you're in and telling this story.
I know. Yeah. Okay. And I'll quickly share that experience and that time in Madrid. Like, our vacation was still, we had like 4 or 5 more days left on our trip. Yeah. That happened kind of in the middle. The next part of our trip was to go to Andorra, which I didn't even know this was a country until we started planning the trip. And we're like, oh, there's this little country that's in the mountains and I love hiking, so let's go there. Yeah. I did a solo hike in the snow. I mean, I solo hike all the time, but I solo hiked in Andorra in the snow 3 days after this happened. And then the last leg of our trip was Barcelona, and my friend had to leave early. Again, I travel solo around the world all the time, so it's not news for me to be alone in a city, but to be alone in a city after that happened, well, that was the first city I was alone in after this happened. Yeah. And I went and I did all the touristy things. I walked through the city. I went to the market. I was out at night. I was going to cafes, because I knew that it was likely that exact same thing would happen again. And even if it did, I knew that I had the tools to handle it, so that if it did happen again, okay, well, at least I am prepared if I needed to respond. Because like I said, I'm a data nerd. I actually pulled up an excerpt from that study. Would it be okay if I read it? Because I feel like this answers your question about the neurobiologic pathways
Absolutely. Yeah, I would love that.
Okay. So this is from a study by David Simpson and Cotton in 2006 called Taking Charge, a pilot curriculum of self-defense and personal safety training because of military sexual trauma. And it was published in the Journal of Interpersonal Violence. So the excerpt says self-defense training can incorporate the benefits of repeated exposure while teaching proactive cognitive and behavioral responses to the feared stimuli, and thus facilitate emotional and physical rescripting and mastery over the trauma.
I'm glad you shared that. Yes, thank you so much. There's so many thank yous. Thank you again for being on this episode of this podcast, but thank you for what you're doing with Girls Fight Back and for making yourself available to people to learn these skills and these self-empowerment concepts. It's so needed. As you said, we live in a very violent society, and oftentimes I refer to the rape culture that we live in and how our society hides from the concept of rape being so prevalent, but it is. We're going to include a link to your website, and Nicole, I'm going to ask that you send me anything else that you would like people to have access to in terms of links to other information. I can't thank you enough for the time that you've spent with us, and I am looking forward to the possibility of us meeting again together.
Yeah, I would love to come back. I would love to hear what your listeners thought of this episode. And then if they have any questions, we can address anything that comes up and then add to it. Thank you so much for having me as a guest and for all your wonderful and insightful questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicole. That does it for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. I want to give a huge shout out to Nicole Snell for taking time out of her busy schedule to be on the show with me, and for her insights and direction to help us all manage the dangers we confront in our lives. Thank you, Nicole. This has been a true honor. And to you listeners, Nicole wants to hear from you. You can direct your questions to Nicole or give her your insights on this episode by emailing me at davemarkel@gmail.com. That's DAVEMARKEL@gmail.com. I also want to extend the invitation again to any of you who are listening who have experienced rape or sexual assault and are ready to share your story on this podcast to further your personal healing journey or to provide guideposts to others who've been through a similar experience. Email me at that same address, davemarkel@gmail.com, and I'll get in touch with you to discuss the possibility of you being a guest on my show. Thank you again for listening to Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. Please remember to rate this episode and this podcast, and please leave your comments with your impressions of this show. It helps the podcast grow, and I appreciate everything you're doing to share in this experience. Finally, please remember to start by believing, because we all know someone whose life has been affected by rape or sexual assault. We'll see you next week.